Hello, thank you. This is Lucinda Nord with Indiana Association of United Ways, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Human Services webinar with our introduction to the 2015 session of the Indiana General Assembly. We would like to welcome you to this webinar and thank Maggie Snyder of the Indiana Coalition for Human Services and also here on staff at Indiana Association of United Ways, and my fellow colleague, Mark St. John, who works as a lobbyist with the Indiana Association for Community Economic Development and co-chairs with me the Government Affairs Committee of the Indiana Coalition for Human Services. Again, Maggie wears two hats. Mark wears a lot of hats, and we will like to give you a quick introduction to the General Assembly this session, a quick introduction to some of the bills and how you can get engaged and active this session. So Mark, start us off.
I am, excuse me. So the 2015 session is considered the long session, with the primary responsibility to enact a two-year budget that starts July 1st. We do have a good number of freshman legislators this year after last November's election changed the makeup of both the Senate and the House. We now have what might be called a super duper majority, where the Democrats are far outnumbered in the House by a 71-29 difference, and 40 Republicans and 10 Democrats in the Senate. The session kicked off January 6th with a reasonable level of civility.
Yep, you keep going.
All right, that's what I needed to know here. Excuse me. Hang on half a second. There we go. There's a bunch of hot issues this year for the General Assembly. As I said, the biennium budget, but school funding is a big issue this year. Discussion about what's fair, what's adequate, and in many ways is still some of the repercussions from the property tax caps that have been enacted. Within education, there's a lot of discussion about whether the superintendent of public instruction should be elected or appointed. A lot of pressure about expanding school vouchers and the funding for charter schools. A lot of discussion about teacher performance and credentialing, pre-K, etc. A lot of pressure, and tax issues is going to be a big issue this year, with an emphasis about simplification. Simplification is in the eye of the beholder, and as we deal with that, with exemptions and credits, the concern will be, are there any things that might be eliminated in that process? A lot of discussion about domestic violence issues and sexual trafficking, adoption promotion, and in a broad way around rape issues and such. There are several bills being filed there. We get to talk about expanding gambling. The casinos are not bringing in the revenue that they would like, and Indiana has become very dependent on that revenue. So a large discussion about whether what's expansion of gaming here. Sunday alcohol sales, which made a big leap this week with a bill that was filed that would allow those kind of sales of alcohol on Sundays. Stuff about wineries and breweries also. Taxes and regulations on cigarettes and e-cigarettes is a serious discussion. And then, of course, guns come up again, about whether they can be allowed on campuses and other government properties. Let me talk briefly about what the governor's priorities are. I think that's still me, isn't it?
Yes.
The governor has announced his priorities for both the state address and the budget outline. When you look at that, you can kind of see how he's prioritized with a focus around education. The jobs and economic development issues, critical services, and about having the discussion about the superintendent of public instruction being elected, or the role of the State Board of Education in selecting their own chair. Then there's a little bit about what are the caucus priorities? What are the House Republicans, the House Democrats, Senate Republicans, and Senate Democrats looking at? Each of the caucuses have their own priorities, and you can see that there are some very similar themes around the budget, education, jobs, and opportunity. The House Republicans are also focusing on ethics reform after some of the challenging issues, we might say, that have played out in the media this last year about with several different instances where legislators or other public officials were at the very, very edge of what was acceptable and what was not. Redistricting election reform is also coming up as a priority. And that's important because of the very low voter turnout we had this last election. On slide 7, I pass it off to Maggie.
All right. For the last couple of years, the Indiana Coalition for Human Services has grouped our priorities in 5 areas. Healthy Hoosiers, where we're eager to see federal approval of HIP 2.0 to close the coverage gap. We advocate for working Hoosiers, workforce-ready graduates, accountability, and thriving communities. We are very focused on the state budget this year. The graphics at the right illustrate how our state dollars have been invested in the last budget, with the majority going to education. The majority of the revenues came from individuals and families through state sales tax and income tax. Because we are so concerned about the budget, we at the Indiana Coalition for Human Services launched the Invest in Hoosiers campaign, which we will describe a little later. We'll now run through the many bills we are following. For the next 9 slides, we are simply listing some of the bills that have been filed, grouped by our ICHS priorities. Remember that many, many more bills are filed than are actually heard in committee. In the coming weeks, we will see which bills and policy ideas gain traction.
Great, thanks Maggie and Mark. So ICHS is most concerned about healthcare coverage and closing the gap. As Maggie mentioned, we are anxiously awaiting notice about a federal approval for HIP 2.0 because we've been very involved in the Cover Indiana campaign. And as you are all probably aware, navigators and assisters are working to enroll those above poverty into the marketplace before the February 15th deadline. And if you have questions about that, you can certainly check out in211.org/events to find a location near you where you could connect with a healthcare navigator. But the bills that we're following from ICHS and from IUW in the health area tend to deal with very specific health issues. And what we're seeing are most likely to move are things like the safety pin program, increases to domestic violence funding, regulation of human or sex trafficking, and as Mark mentioned, all of the bills around rape issues. We've also seen that pain and mental health best practices have been sort of a high priority so far. So you see lots of bills that are listed. Again, just because a bill is listed does not mean that it is gaining traction. Lots of bills are filed which are never heard in committee. Another group of bills are heard in committee but actually either get changed to a study committee or die. So here are just a handful of committees that we have grouped in what we call our Healthy Hoosiers category, and we can let you read through those. We'll take time at the end for questions. Mark, do you want to talk about working Hoosiers?
Yes, ma'am. There's a lot of rhetoric. Everything's about people having jobs. There we go. There are several bills that relate to work sharing. It relates to the unemployment insurance program and unemployment insurance. If there's some offers for tax credits on hiring certain individuals, personnel leave, removing past crimes from somebody's record if they meet certain categories. There's some discussion about the minimum wage, increasing that, fair pay employment, etc. here. There's a bill to expand the earned income tax credit and require employers to post work schedules prior to work weeks. Next slide, please.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Go ahead.
Yep. So as you saw from the 4 caucus priorities, education is a high priority for each of the 4 caucuses and for the governor. So we're seeing lots and lots of bills related to education in both the Senate and the House Education Committees. We're seeing a continuation of some of the education reform ideas that we've seen in the past, as well as expansion proposals for pre-K and child care and some very specific issues around different elements around school. So we're seeing a lot of traction around increasing school counselors. The iRead bill actually, I believe, was changed to a study committee already. And then we're seeing lots of different kinds of bills related from teachers, as Mark described earlier, to school governance, and there are also what are called some school deregulation bills that are also gaining some traction. So education is going to be a hot topic to watch this session. And you see there are some others related to children as well that we also put into this category from an ICHS perspective. I'm going to let Mark talk a little bit about some of the bills around our category of thriving communities.
Find my notes here, excuse me. 211 funding, which I'm assuming that there are several United Way related folks on the call, may be making headway this year in House Bill 1010. There continues to be stuff about looking at tax incentives and the Legislative Services review of tax things, some bills that relate to estimated utility bills, renewable energy standards, the Neighborhood Assistance Program tax credits are some of those things. Next slide, please. A lot of stuff about good government. There are at least 3 bills that relate to redistricting commission here, which would be that step towards perhaps a more nonpartisan or bipartisan way to draw the lines for elections. There's a looking at township assistance. At the same time, there's a discussion about should people be able to vote for on a straight ticket, all Republicans or all Democrats in an election, legislative ethics, and then the selection of the superintendent of public instruction. So those are high interest bills.
Absolutely. Maggie?
I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk to you more about the Invest in Hoosiers campaign. So this was started because the ICHS board found success last year with the Cover Indiana campaign through mobilizing individuals and organizations who may or may not have been involved with ICHS before. Now the ICHS board has invested its resources to launch the Invest in Hoosiers campaign. This campaign seeks to change the conversations about our state's budget. We want legislators to make Hoosiers a priority and for them to know why it's important to start making strategic investments in the budget once again. We're not calling for wholesale budget increases, as it is important that Indiana remains fiscally sound. Rather, we are asking for investments in programs and services that have been proven to do the most good for everyday Hoosiers and that improve the overall economic vitality of our state. We need investments in things like quality child care and preschool, textbooks, school counselors, tax credits for workers, and financial opportunities for working adults to gain skills. Here you can see our top 5 priorities for the campaign. And here are some more specific policy asks that we're looking for in the state's budget, and these are the things that we think will help benefit individual Hoosiers and their families. ICHS has hired a consultant, Kristen Clements-Effner, to help staff this campaign. So here are some ways that we want to encourage you all to become involved. So you can sign up to support the campaign at investinhoosiers.org. And I want to recommend that you like the campaign on Facebook and follow the Invest in Hoosiers Twitter account.
Great, thank you. So now we're going to transition a little to how you can get involved and take part. So Maggie just described how you as an individual or your organization can join the Invest in Hoosiers campaign through the Coalition for Human Services. And I want to take a few minutes to just remind you about how you can get involved. We always like to remind folks that nonprofits are allowed to advocate. Yes, there are rules about lobbying, which is, as a reminder, spending your organizational resources to lobby your legislators with a specific ask, or to ask your constituents to ask your legislators for a specific bill or a specific policy change. What we recognize in the nonprofit community is that most of what we do is in the area of education and awareness. It's advocacy, not necessarily lobbying. We're simply telling our stories of our organizational mission, what certain policies or investments mean for our clients or for our organizations or communities. So it's absolutely critical to have you as a volunteer, or your board members as volunteers, or your other volunteers and staff help tell that story. So we like to remind our friends and colleagues how to get started in advocacy, especially if you're nervous or new to advocacy. Remember that all of us were new to this at one time. There are lots of resources to help. We at Indiana Association of United Ways provide a lot of those resources, just helping you understand the connection between the programs that you run as a nonprofit human service provider and the public policies that really influence that, or the services for your clients. We encourage a lot of nonprofits to develop or approve a policy agenda or policy priorities, or simply to have the discussions at board meetings, and then identify those key board members or committee volunteers who can help advocate by maybe signing a letter to the editor or a guest column, or attending meetings with you. But the most important thing that all of your volunteers and staff can do is just to explain why you are a staff member or volunteer with the organization where you work or volunteer. It has a mission, you believe in that work, and it's important to share that because that helps tell the story. So what are the things that you can do now? What we can tell you is that communicating with your legislators is absolutely critical. Just a few contacts can make a difference on a particular issue. Most legislators will listen to constituents and sincerely care about their experiences. They like to tour facilities. They like to get to meet people who are affected by the policies. So the ways that you can do that are to have regular communications with your legislators. Many communities offer what's called a third house or a meet your legislator session. We actually track those statewide on a calendar, and the link is right here. If you have questions about what do I do, I've never attended one, you're welcome to contact us, and we'd be happy to tell you a little bit of background about your legislator or some of the key issues that they're interested in. We encourage you to educate your board, volunteers, and staff about the important issues. I can't stress enough how important it is to have a little bit of policy discussion at board meetings and at committee meetings, because it does affect our services and our clients and the work that we do. Everyone has heard of the steps of the Kevin Bacon game in terms of the movies. We like to tell people to map their relationships with their legislators. You may not know your legislator, but you probably know someone who knows someone who knows someone who knows the legislator, maybe through school or a faith community or a business relationship, that alumni club that you belong to. Somehow there's a connection. And that, again, we usually encourage nonprofits to host a local tour or session. It's kind of hard during session because most legislators, especially if you're out in the state, are here in Indianapolis from Sunday night or Monday morning through Thursday. So it's kind of hard to get them during the session, but after session is usually a good time for those tours. We encourage you to come visit the State House. This is a photo of one of our United Way Day at the State House events. Here are a couple of our events of our members of ICHS just coming up. And if you are affiliated with any of those organizations, you are welcome to reach out to those organizations and try to join their State House Day. If you've never been to the State House, we know it can be a little intimidating, so Maggie has prepared a 6-minute presentation to help you prepare for your State House visit, like what to bring, where to park, how to go in, what's security like, what do I take with me? All of those questions are answered in that session, and that's on our website at IAUW. And then there are lots of ways that we work together because, let's face it, the human service community does not have deep pockets to provide the number or the scale of lobbyists that a lot of other groups do. We have to work together to advocate for our clients and our communities. So we do that in a number of ways. Both IAUW and ICHS offer newsletters that try to keep you up to date on the issues, and often those newsletters have links that allow you to link right through to the bills that you're interested in. We ask for two-way communications. We like to hear from you about what is going well and what needs help in your communities. How would a particular bill affect your community or your clients or your organization? We like to hear that so that we can have those specific stories. Here in this slide, you see that there are 2 bill lists that are linked. At IAUW, we actually have, at Indiana Association of United Ways, we actually group all of our bills by our priorities in education, financial stability, health, and the charitable sector. For Indiana Coalition for Human Services, we have a bill list as well, and those bill lists provide a quick summary of the bill with a link to the state's website. Again, we maintain the Third House lists that provide the calendar for when your legislators might be getting together in your community. Again, we talked about the day at the State House and encourage you to participate in those if you are able. And if you're not able to participate in a day at the State House, why not make a phone call or do an email on the day that you know that some of your colleagues from your community might be going. Maybe you can't take away time from your client work that you need to stay back at the office, but you can make a phone call or make an email. And then we always try to coordinate our testimony. Legislators, especially in these committee hearings, are very tight on time, so we try to organize our testimony to make it the most compelling. You'll hear, if you watch any of the hearings online, you'll hear committee chairs often say things like, don't repeat something that's already been said. So we try to get the most compelling testimony organized, and if there's a whole list of groups that support a particular issue, we might list out those groups. So it's helpful to know when you have particular interests in a bill. And then we've mentioned a couple of the coalitions, like our Coalition for Human Services. There's also a Children's Coalition of Indiana, and then the new Invest in Hoosiers campaign. So at this point, I will stop and take any questions online about any of the bills or what's going on in the State House. And again, type your questions either in the chat box or in the question box, and we'll see if we have any questions. I'm not seeing any questions from our attendees yet. Let's see. I'm not seeing any. Okay, no other questions. I can't believe that we answered everything. I think it's that it's very early in the session. I'll give it just a couple more moments. There have been lots of bill activity already. We do have a question. So what are they proposing with the NAP credits? Great question. So for those of you who don't know, NAP credits are the Neighborhood Assistance Program tax credits. It is a charitable giving incentive where nonprofits in Indiana can apply for a certain amount of tax credits through the Indiana Housing and Community Development Authority. Then that nonprofit would seek donations from community members or businesses, and they essentially sell the credits in essence, and then the donor is able to take a 50% tax credit off their state taxes for the half of the contribution that is made. What are they proposing with NAP credits? NAP credits is one of those giving credits that has been on the question list for several years. It's often on the list to be repealed or sunset. There are a number of tax credits, deductions, and exemptions that were highlighted as part of the Tax Simplification Conference back in the fall. There is a strong effort to simplify the tax code, and one of the ways that they want to simplify it is to eliminate certain exemptions, deductions, and credits. And NAP credit is on that list as one for possible elimination or repeal. Mark, did you want to say anything else about NAP?
You covered it very well. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Anything? Okay. We have a question about the DCS bills. I am not an expert in the DCS bills. We understand that a number of the changes are administrative changes through the Department of Child Services, but I'll ask Mark or Maggie if they are aware of anything specific about the DCS bills.
I have not dug into the DCS bill closely or very deeply. My impression was it was just a lot of cleanup kinds of stuff. Now, I might be mistaken about that. Maggie, do you have any other observations?
Not that I know of, or no.
Okay, we can dig into that and get back to you individually. So if there are any other specific questions, Mary Jo, I'll get back to you directly. She had a very specific question. Am I seeing any other questions? I'm not seeing any others. If you do, our email information is available. You see here we have a number of the websites listed, and additionally you see some additional helpful websites both about the federal and the state. We didn't cover any federal issues today, but we might in a future session. I'm not seeing any other questions, so let me just check one more time. And so at this point, we'd like to thank you for all that you do to support our neighbors in need. This was the first of 3 sessions. We will have another legislative update session around the point of what's called the crossover, and that's when the bills cross over from the first house to the second chamber. So if a bill starts in the House, it will move to the Senate, or if it starts in the Senate, it will move to the House, and that will be around the 4th week of February. We will have a second webinar, and then upon the conclusion of the session at the end of April, in early May, we will have a wrap-up session where we will explain everything that was passed and a little bit about the budget, because it's always really important to know what exactly happened with the budget. So again, we thank you for all that you do to support your neighbors in need. Thank you to Maggie and Mark for joining us on this webinar. If you'd like to hang around after we stop the recording, feel free, and we'll open up the lines. Hold on just one moment.